What if I told you that Americans pour over 3 billion gallons of weed killer onto their yards every single year, fighting a battle they were never going to win? The average homeowner spends 150 hours a year pulling weeds, spraying weeds, and cursing at weeds that come back stronger every season. They sell you pre-emergence in spring, post-emergence in summer, and broadleaf killers in fall. They sell you spreaders and sprayers and protective gear. They have built an entire industry on the assumption that you will fight weeds in bare soil forever. But weeds only grow where ground is exposed. Nature does not leave bare soil. Walk into any forest and you will find every square inch covered in something living. The weeds you battle every weekend are nature trying to do what your lawn refuses to do, which is cover the ground completely. Smart gardeners stopped fighting weeds decades ago. They planted ground covers so dense that nothing else can germinate beneath them. No light reaches the soil. No seeds find space to root. The weeds simply give up and go elsewhere. Stick around because ground cover number 2 was used by Greek soldiers to pack their wounds and now suppresses weeds so completely that organic farms plant it between rows instead of using herbicides. Here are 9 ground covers that spread faster than grass and choke out every weed, starting now. Welcome to the channel where we dig up forgotten growing wisdom that the chemical industry buried decades ago. If you believe your weekends should not be spent on your hands and knees pulling crabgrass, then you are in the right place. Subscribe and tell me in the comments how much money you spent on weed killer last year. Now let's get into this list, ranked from impressive to absolutely game-changing. Number 9. Pachysandra, the shade specialist. Most weeds love disturbed soil and partial sun. They invade lawn edges where grass thins out and bare patches form under trees. Pachysandra solves the problem by occupying that exact territory and refusing to share. Native to Japan and the southern United States, this evergreen ground cover has been carpeting woodland gardens for over a century. The glossy leaves stay attractive year-round, and the dense growth habit creates a living mat that weed seeds cannot penetrate. Here is what makes Pachysandra remarkable for weed suppression. The plants spread through underground rhizomes, creating an interconnected root network that fills every available inch of soil. Once established, that root mat physically excludes germinating weed seeds. Studies on woodland restoration have measured weed populations dropping by over 90% within 2 years of Pachysandra establishment. Plant 6 to 12 inches apart in shade where grass will never thrive. Within 2 seasons, the plants knit together into solid coverage. Small white flower spikes appear in spring, though most gardeners grow Pachysandra for the foliage rather than the blooms. Deer leave it alone. Disease problems are minimal once plants are established in good soil. 3 varieties offer slightly different growth habits. Japanese Pachysandra is the standard form found in most garden centers. Allegheny Pachysandra is the Native American species, with mottled foliage that some gardeners prefer for naturalistic plantings. Variegated forms add cream or white edging to the leaves, brightening dark corners where solid green Pachysandra would simply blend into the shadows. Establishment takes patience during the first year. The plants put their energy into developing the underground rhizome network rather than producing visible foliage growth. By the second year, expansion becomes visible. By the third year, weed suppression reaches its full effect. For anyone whose shady areas have become weed nurseries despite repeated reseeding attempts, Pachysandra eliminates the bare ground that weeds require. The next ground cover does something Pachysandra cannot. It releases compounds into the soil that actually prevent weed seeds from germinating in the first place. Number 8. Wild ginger, the chemical warrior. Indigenous peoples across eastern North America used wild ginger for centuries as both medicine and seasoning. The roots release a compound called acerone, which gives the plant its distinctive ginger-like fragrance and flavor. Modern researchers discovered that acerone also functions as a natural herbicide. Here is what makes wild ginger exceptional for weed suppression. The plant uses a technique called allelopathy, releasing chemicals into the surrounding soil that inhibit germination of competing plant seeds. Your wild ginger patch becomes a living herbicide barrier without any spraying involved. The heart-shaped leaves form a dense canopy 6 to 8 inches tall, creating deep shade at soil level. Curious purplish-brown flowers appear at ground level in spring, hidden beneath the foliage. Pollination happens through ground-dwelling insects rather than flying pollinators, an evolutionary quirk that makes wild ginger fascinating to observe. Plant 8 to 12 inches apart in moist shade beneath trees. Wild ginger spreads through slowly creeping rhizomes, forming larger colonies each year. The plants prefer rich woodland soil with consistent moisture, but tolerate drier conditions once established. Native to forests across the eastern United States and Canada, wild ginger fits naturally into woodland landscapes without looking artificial. For anyone who wants weed suppression that works through plant chemistry rather than physical coverage alone, wild ginger fights weeds the way a forest does. A note on identification matters here. The wild ginger discussed here is Asarum canadense in eastern North America, or its close relative Asarum europaeum from European forests. These should not be confused with culinary ginger, which is a tropical plant unrelated to the temperate woodland ground cover. Both wild ginger species produce that distinctive ginger-like fragrance from the roots, and both have been used historically in cooking and medicine. Indigenous Americans used Asarum canadense roots in similar applications to commercial ginger root, though the chemistry differs and modern herbalists generally recommend caution with internal use. Number 7. Lamb's ear, the silver suppressor. Greek soldiers carried lamb's ear leaves into battle for a practical reason. The soft, absorbent foliage worked as field bandages for sword wounds. 25 centuries later, that same dense, fuzzy growth makes lamb's ear one of the most effective weed-choking ground covers available. Here is what makes lamb's ear special. The silvery, woolly leaves overlap to form a thick mat that completely shades the soil beneath. Any weed seed that lands on lamb's ear foliage cannot reach the ground to germinate. The plants prefer full sun and well-drained soil, exactly the conditions where most aggressive weeds thrive. Lamb's ear spreads through above-ground stolons, sending out runners that root wherever they touch soil. A few starter plants will cover several square feet within 2 seasons. Pink or purple flower spikes rise above the foliage in early summer, attracting bees and butterflies. Many gardeners cut the flower stalks before bloom to keep the plants focused on foliage production. Drought tolerance is another bonus. Once established, lamb's ear survives summers that turn lawns brown and weeds frantic. The thick leaves store moisture, and the silver coloration reflects heat that would stress other plants. Children love touching the soft foliage, which feels like petting a small animal. Plant 12 to 18 inches apart in sunny areas where weeds have been winning. The plants spread fast enough to fill gaps before crabgrass and dandelions can establish. For anyone with sunny problem areas where weeds keep returning despite repeated treatment, lamb's ear creates a silver carpet that weeds cannot penetrate. A few practical considerations apply to lamb's ear plantings. The fuzzy leaves can rot in humid conditions if water sits on them for extended periods, so morning sun that dries the foliage works better than evening watering. Older leaves at the center of plants sometimes brown out and need removal in spring to keep the planting looking fresh. The plants benefit from division every 3 to 4 years, which also gives you free starts to expand coverage to other areas of the yard. Number 6. Vinca minor, the living carpet. Catholic monks brought Vinca minor across Europe during the medieval period, planting it in monastery gardens for both ornamental beauty and practical ground cover. 900 years later, those same plants still grow in the ruins of abandoned abbeys, having outlasted the buildings themselves. Here is why Vinca minor excels at suppressing weeds. The trailing stems root at every node, creating a living mesh that anchors itself across the ground. Within 3 years of planting, the foliage becomes so dense that sunlight cannot reach the soil. Without sunlight, weed seeds simply cannot germinate. Glossy evergreen leaves provide year-round coverage, even through winter snow in cold climates. Periwinkle blue flowers appear in spring, with sporadic blooming continuing through summer. White and purple varieties offer alternatives to the classic blue. The plants thrive in partial to full shade, exactly where most ground covers struggle and where most weeds attempt to invade. Plant 12 to 18 inches apart and water during the establishment phase. Vinca minor requires almost no maintenance once it takes hold. The plants tolerate drought, poor soil, and complete neglect without losing vigor. Deer ignore vinca, and pest problems are essentially non-existent. One important note: vinca can spread aggressively in optimal conditions, so plant it where you want long-term coverage rather than as a temporary solution. Some regions list vinca as potentially invasive, so check local guidelines before establishing large plantings. For anyone who wants evergreen weed suppression that has proven itself across nearly 1,000 years of European garden history, Vinca minor delivers the kind of permanence that other ground covers cannot match. Number 5. Creeping Mazus, the speed champion. Asian gardeners have grown mazus for centuries in the cool, moist conditions of mountain valleys. When American plant explorers brought the species to North America in the 1800s, gardeners discovered something remarkable. Mazus spreads faster than almost any other ornamental ground cover while flowering for months on end. Here is what makes creeping mazus exceptional for weed control. The plants form dense mats only 1 to 2 inches tall, hugging the ground so tightly that no weed can establish beneath them. Tiny tubular flowers in purple, white, or pink appear from spring through fall, providing color while the foliage handles the weed suppression. Growth speed is the standout feature. Plants start 6 to 8 inches apart in spring, and the plants will fill gaps completely by midsummer. The shallow root system spreads horizontally across the soil surface, creating a living blanket that excludes weed seedlings before they can establish. Mazus tolerates light foot traffic, which makes it suitable for areas between stepping stones and along pathways. The plants prefer consistent moisture, though they survive brief drought periods. Full sun produces the best flowering, while partial shade still gives good foliage coverage. Mazus stays semi-evergreen in mild climates, providing winter coverage that prevents cool season weeds from establishing. For anyone who needs weed suppression to happen quickly rather than over multiple seasons, creeping mazus delivers complete coverage faster than weeds can invade. 2 species dominate the available varieties. Mazus reptans is the most common, with purple-blue flowers and aggressive spreading habit. Mazus radicans produces white flowers and stays slightly more compact. Both species perform similarly in terms of weed suppression, so selection comes down to flower color preference and availability at local nurseries. The plants pair well with spring bulbs. Mazus emerges later than tulips and daffodils, allowing the bulbs to complete their growth cycle before the ground cover fills in. By summer, when bulb foliage would normally look ragged, the mazus has covered everything with fresh green growth and continuous flowers. Number 4. Bishop's weed, the aggressive champion. Roman gardeners cultivated bishop's weed 2,000 years ago, calling it goutweed because they used the leaves to treat painful joint conditions. The plant earned its English name from medieval bishops who grew it in cathedral gardens for the same medicinal purposes. Whatever you call it, this ground cover has been suppressing weeds across Europe for at least 20 centuries. Here is why bishop's weed handles weeds that defeat other plants. The aggressive underground rhizome system spreads horizontally through the soil at remarkable speed, sending up new shoots every few inches. Within 2 years, a small patch becomes a dense colony that blocks all light from reaching the ground beneath. The variegated form, with cream-edged leaves, gives the plant ornamental appeal that the plain green species lacks. White flat-topped flower clusters appear in early summer, though many gardeners cut these before they bloom to prevent self-seeding and to keep plants focused on root spread. Bishop's weed thrives in challenging conditions that defeat most ornamentals. Heavy clay soil works fine. Deep shade beneath mature trees works. Drought-prone slopes work. The plants tolerate root competition from large trees, an unusual quality that makes bishop's weed valuable for difficult sites where other ground covers fail. A serious warning is necessary. Bishop's weed spreads so aggressively that it should never be planted near garden beds containing valuable plants. The rhizomes will invade adjacent areas and prove nearly impossible to remove. Plant bishop's weed only in areas with hard borders such as paved walkways, building foundations, or deep root barriers. Several states list bishop's weed as invasive, so check local regulations before planting. For anyone with a difficult area, surrounded by hardscape where nothing else thrives and weeds run rampant, bishop's weed colonizes territory that other ground covers cannot conquer. Number 3. Sweet woodruff, the forest floor specialist. Walk any old European forest, and you will find sweet woodruff carpeting the ground beneath the trees, exactly where weeds would otherwise dominate. Medieval Europeans harvested the dried leaves to flavor wines and stuff mattresses, valuing the vanilla-like fragrance that develops as the foliage dries. Modern gardeners value the same plant for an entirely different reason. Here is what makes sweet woodruff effective at choking out weeds. The whorled leaves, arranged like spokes around each stem, create a layered canopy that blocks sunlight at every level. Beneath the foliage, the soil stays in deep shadow throughout the growing season. Weed seeds that require light to germinate simply cannot start. The plants spread through underground runners, forming dense colonies in shaded woodland conditions. Tiny white star-shaped flowers cover the foliage in spring, providing 2 to 3 weeks of ornamental display before the plants return to their primary role as ground cover. The fragrance becomes especially noticeable when foliage is brushed against or crushed. Sweet woodruff prefers exactly the conditions where most ground covers struggle. Deep shade beneath mature trees works perfectly. Acidic soil that defeats many ornamentals suits sweet woodruff fine. Cool, moist conditions promote the fastest growth, but established plants tolerate brief drought periods. The plants are remarkably tough despite their delicate appearance. Plant 6 to 12 inches apart in early spring. Within 2 seasons, the colony will fill the planting area completely, forming a green carpet that shades out competing vegetation. Maintenance is essentially zero once plants are established. The colonies expand gradually each year, allowing you to extend coverage by simply letting the plants spread. For anyone with shaded areas where lawn refuses to grow and weeds keep invading, sweet woodruff handles those forest floor conditions naturally. The traditional German preparation called May wine deserves a mention. Country households across Germany still steep dried sweet woodruff leaves in white wine each May to produce a beverage flavored with the vanilla hay aroma that characterizes the dried foliage. The compound responsible is coumarin, which becomes more pronounced as the leaves dry. Fresh foliage has only a faint scent, but cut a handful of leaves and let them wilt for a few hours, and the fragrance becomes intense enough to perfume a room. Some gardeners worry about coumarin toxicity since the compound has anticoagulant properties at high doses. Traditional culinary use in moderation has continued for centuries without problems, but anyone on blood-thinning medications should avoid consuming the plant in any form. Number 2. Creeping thyme, the aromatic assassin. Greek shepherds grazed their flocks across hillsides covered in wild thyme, knowing the herb produced superior milk and meat. Roman soldiers bathed in thyme water before battle, believing the herb gave them courage. Modern organic farmers plant creeping thyme between vegetable rows for an entirely practical reason. The aromatic oils released by thyme foliage actively suppress weed seed germination in the surrounding soil. Here is what makes creeping thyme exceptional for choking out weeds. The dense, mat-forming growth habit creates physical coverage that excludes weed seedlings. Beyond physical suppression, the volatile oils released by crushed or warmed foliage contain compounds that inhibit germination of nearby seeds. Walking on thyme releases these oils directly into the surrounding soil, providing chemical weed suppression with every footstep. Tiny pink, purple, or white flowers cover the foliage for several weeks in summer, creating a flowering carpet that hums with bee activity. The plants stay only 2 to 4 inches tall, requiring no mowing. Drought tolerance is exceptional once plants are established. Full sun and well-drained soil are the only real requirements. Several varieties offer different growth habits and flower colors. Mother of Thyme spreads quickly and tolerates light foot traffic. Woolly thyme has gray-green fuzzy foliage and creates the densest mat. Red creeping thyme produces magenta flowers and handles slightly more shade than other varieties. All of them suppress weeds effectively while providing aromatic foliage that you can harvest for cooking. Plant 6 to 12 inches apart in spring. The plants establish quickly during the first growing season and fill in completely by the second year. Once established, creeping thyme requires almost nothing from you. No watering after establishment, no fertilizing ever, no mowing required. The plants tolerate poor soil better than rich soil, which would actually reduce flowering and aromatic oil production. Organic farms across Europe and increasingly in North America plant creeping thyme between vegetable rows specifically to reduce herbicide use. The technique works in home gardens too, where pathways of thyme between raised beds create fragrant, weed-free walking surfaces. For anyone who wants weed suppression through both physical coverage and natural plant chemistry, creeping thyme attacks weeds the way Mediterranean hillsides have for thousands of years. The honey produced from thyme flowers ranks among the most prized varieties in commercial beekeeping. Greek thyme honey from Mount Hymettus near Athens has been famous since ancient times, with that same reputation continuing today. If you keep bees, even a small patch of creeping thyme adds distinctive flavor notes to your honey harvest. Culinary use deserves attention too. The leaves of creeping thyme contain the same essential oils as the upright cooking thyme found in spice racks, though the flavor concentration is somewhat lower. You can harvest small amounts for cooking without harming the planting. Just snip the tops of stems and use them fresh, or hang small bundles to dry for winter use. Roast chicken seasoned with thyme harvested from your own walkway connects you to your garden in ways that store-bought spices cannot. Creeping thyme suppresses weeds chemically and physically. We have reached number 1, the ground cover so effective at choking out weeds that it eliminates the need for fertilizer, herbicide, and most lawn care chemicals combined. Number 1, white clover, the complete solution. Before the chemical lawn care industry transformed American landscapes in the 1950s, every grass seed mix sold in the United States contained white clover. Farmers and homeowners knew that clover and grass grew better together than either grew alone. Then chemical companies developed selective herbicides that killed broadleaf plants in lawns. They could not create a herbicide that killed weeds without also killing clover, so they did the next best thing. They redefined clover as a weed and convinced an entire generation that the plant their grandparents valued was actually a problem. Here is the truth that the herbicide industry buried. White clover fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil through specialized root nodules, providing free fertilizer to surrounding plants. A clover lawn requires no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, ever. The savings on fertilizer alone justify the conversion from grass to clover. The dense growth habit creates complete soil coverage that excludes most weed species. Crabgrass cannot establish where clover dominates. Dandelions struggle to compete with clover's network of roots and runners. The combination of physical coverage and aggressive growth makes clover one of the most effective weed-suppressing ground covers in temperate climates. Drought tolerance is another major advantage. Clover stays green during summer drought when grass turns brown and crispy. The deep root system reaches moisture that shallow grass roots cannot access. During the drought summers that have become increasingly common, clover lawns remain functional while grass lawns require constant irrigation just to survive. Bees love clover flowers. A clover lawn supports pollinator populations that grass lawns cannot. The white flower clusters appear from late spring through fall, providing continuous food for honeybees, native bees, and butterflies. Some homeowners worry about getting stung, but bees focused on clover flowers ignore people walking through the lawn. Children and pets coexist with clover lawns without incident in millions of yards across the country. Clover tolerates foot traffic from children playing, dogs running, and adults walking. The plants recover quickly from compression and damage. Mowing height can range from 2 inches to completely unmowed, depending on your aesthetic preference. Mowed clover stays neat and uniform. Unmowed clover grows 4 to 8 inches tall and flowers throughout the growing season. Establishment is straightforward. Clover seed germinates faster than grass seed and establishes within a single growing season. You can overseed existing lawns with clover seed in spring or fall, gradually converting from grass to a clover-grass mixture to pure clover. Cost per square foot is dramatically lower than sod installation or repeated grass reseeding. The varieties available today have improved considerably from old-fashioned white clover. Microclover stays smaller and produces fewer flowers, satisfying homeowners who want the benefits without the bee activity. Strawberry clover handles wet soil that defeats white clover. Crimson clover provides spectacular red flowers and works as a cover crop that gets tilled into garden beds. For anyone ready to stop fighting weeds and start working with nature instead, white clover does everything grass does while requiring nothing grass demands. Free fertilizer through nitrogen fixation, drought tolerance that grass cannot match, pollinator support that grass cannot provide, and weed suppression that eliminates the need for herbicides entirely. The financial math deserves some attention. The average American homeowner spends between $200 and $500 per year on lawn fertilizer, herbicides, and related products. Over a decade, that total reaches several $1,000s. A clover lawn eliminates essentially all of those expenses after the initial seeding cost. The savings continue indefinitely. Water consumption follows the same pattern. Lawns account for approximately 30% of residential water use in the United States, with that figure rising to 60% in dry western states. A clover lawn typically requires half the irrigation of a grass lawn, with established plantings often surviving entirely on natural rainfall in regions that receive 30 inches or more annually. Conversion strategies vary depending on your starting point and timeline. The fastest method involves killing existing grass through smothering with cardboard and mulch for several weeks, then seeding clover into the prepared soil. Slower methods involve overseeding clover into existing lawn during fall or early spring, then gradually reducing fertilizer and herbicide use to favor clover over grass. Within 3 years of beginning the conversion, most lawns transition to mostly clover with minimal active intervention. These 9 ground covers replace the bare soil battlefield that weeds require with living coverage that weeds cannot penetrate. Some suppress weeds through dense physical coverage. Others release natural compounds that prevent weed seed germination. The most effective combine multiple strategies to create weed-free spaces without herbicides. The chemical industry has spent 70 years convincing American homeowners that weeds are an unavoidable enemy requiring constant chemical warfare. That story sells billions of dollars worth of products each year. The story is also fundamentally wrong. Weeds are nature responding to bare soil. Eliminate bare soil, and you eliminate weeds. The ground covers on this list eliminate bare soil more completely than any lawn grass ever could. Within 2 or 3 growing seasons, your weed problems can become permanent solutions instead of perpetual struggles. Pick 2 or 3 plants from this list that match your conditions. Pachysandra and sweet woodruff for shaded areas where weeds invade thinning lawn. Lamb's ear and creeping thyme for sunny problem spots where crabgrass and dandelions dominate. White clover for entire lawn replacement that supports pollinators and eliminates fertilizer costs. Wild ginger for woodland edges where chemical-based weed suppression works as well as physical coverage. Bishop's weed for difficult areas surrounded by hardscape where nothing else can establish. Start with the worst weed problems on your property, the areas where you have given up entirely or where you spend hours each season pulling and spraying. Plant ground covers in those spots first and watch the transformation happen. These plants have been suppressing weeds in natural ecosystems for millions of years. They are ready to suppress weeds in yours. Within a few seasons, you can stop buying herbicides entirely. You can stop spending weekends on your hands and knees. You can stop the chemical warfare that has defined American lawn care for the past 70 years. Your grandparents knew most of what is on this list. They grew clover in their lawns and pachysandra under their trees. They planted creeping thyme between stepping stones and let Bishop's weed fill the difficult corners of their properties. The chemical industry convinced your parents to abandon those traditions and buy products instead. You can choose to return to the methods that worked for centuries before anyone invented selective herbicides. If this video showed you a path away from the chemical lawn care treadmill, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments which ground cover you are planting first. The weeds you have been fighting for years are about to meet their match.